Do you know what I come to realize about the fact that when I hear people talking about schizoid personality disorder, I notice one thing. Why do they never mention anything about the daydreaming? Why do they not mention anything about the inner fantasy world? Now, I know on Wikipedia in particular, when they talk about schizoid personality being a long-standing pattern of, avoidance, emotional coldness, lack of desire of personal intimacy or relationships. And they mention a brief, lasting thing when they have when they seem to have a proxy relationship with living in a inner fantasy world. Now, another thing I want to mention about another similar disorder, something much more severe. As a matter of fact, this disorder is perhaps one of the worst mental disorders known to mankind, and that is schizophrenia. Now, I have the Wikipedia definition of schizophrenia. Schizophrenia being a long-term mental disorder of a type of evolving breakdown of actions and feelings and withdrawal. One thing I want to mention is another thing that's similar to schizoid. Okay, one thing I want to mention. Fuck! Another thing I want to mention about this situation is a disorder similar to schizoid personality disorder, but far worse. We all know of this disorder. Now, many of the uneducated public who don't really know about schizoid personality disorder, but when they hear schizoid, they think it's schizophrenia. And schizophrenia is perhaps one of the worst mental disorders known to mankind. I'm going to give you the Wikipedia definition of schizophrenia. Okay, schizophrenia is a long-term mental disorder of a type of evolving breakdown of actions and feelings of withdrawal from reality of a person's relating into fantasy and delusions and self-fragmentation, whatever. I didn't write this down neatly. Anyway, we all have an idea what schizophrenia is. Anyway, one thing people never talk about, people always say, well, schizophrenics seem to not know the difference between reality and fantasy. If you ever experience a schizophrenic episode or a schizophrenic situation, I have. If you ever heard one of those audible voices, I remember the first time when I heard an audible voice speak to me. I mean, it scared the living hell out of me, seriously. It's an audible voice. It's a voice. It's not something like, I don't have schizophrenia. I have schizoid personality disorder. I have intense daydreams. I have a voice in my head, but it's an imaginary voice that I've been controlled. But when I experienced with some drugs one time, it was like it was a drug I got off the deep web. It was like a research chemical. It was kind of like a LSD, but it made me very delusional. And I heard this very real, very sounding demonic voice speak to me, and it came from the outside. Of course, I only heard it one time, but this gave me an idea of what schizophrenics go through. This gave me a severe idea of what schizophrenics go through. When I was on this delusionary drug, I went through different when I was highly on this drug at the height of it, I went through different delusions, different fantasies. Some fantasies were controlled, some fantasies became delusions that felt real, and I end up walking to some places, driving to some places. I was walking around. I was all over the place. I couldn't, I was very tormenting, very irritated. There was there was a sense of this narcissistic, this element of me being a god, or me being someone special, but then there was this tormenting of me just being this socially inferior, humiliating individual person. This is what the schizophrenic goes through. Now, you have to understand that people with schizophrenia do sometimes know the difference between reality and fantasies or their delusions, but their delusions feel real. My delusions, when I was on that stuff, felt very real, but I knew there were delusions. But it's like my brain would get caught up into these illusions, and I would get trained, and I would have to go and pursue this false reality, these fantasies, because if I didn't, I would get tormented. This is how the schizophrenic lives on an everyday basis. This is how they end up homeless, because it paralyzes them to where they can't function. Schizophrenia can be managed with medication. Certainly, you have to have a healthy environment. You have to have strong family support. But it is a crippling disease. I've seen this disease take away some of the most brightest individuals, mathematicians. I've seen people who are very good in different biological chemistry and stuff like that. I've seen some brilliant people develop this disease. It is not something that is limited to people who are uneducated, or people who are dumb, or people who are weak-minded. It's a disease. Now, me having schizoid personality disorder, I have the negative symptoms of schizoid personality disorder: the withdrawal, the void, the emotional coldness, and everything. But the worst part of schizophrenia are the positive symptoms: the delusions of grandeur, the auditory voices, the false perceptions, the fragmentation of the mind, all that stuff. Never judge person. Never judge or laugh at a person with schizophrenia, because if you had this disease, you would be exactly the way they were. Well, maybe or maybe not. But what I'm saying is, if you have experienced even a small percentage of schizophrenia, it will cripple you temporarily. It is a serious disease. That's all I have to say.